and Parikshit. So just a reminder, if everyone can keep their microphones on mute, and if possible, turn your videos on. Ashwin Prabhu, nice to see you. Hare Krishna. Maybe if you could just turn your video off, Prabhu, just because it does drain the resources, and sometimes the computer burns out, so we don't want tried out computers.
You have done that.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So we are continuing on with the Srimad Bhagavatam. We have completed the first canto in 2 sessions. And the first canto really is an incredible canto. Srila Prabhupada, when he completed the first canto of the Bhagavatam in 3 volumes, then Srila Prabhupada felt the full confidence to go to the West, to embark upon the Jaladuta, and then to go on his mission to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. When he was leaving for America, one person came to him and said, "Oh, Swamiji, I heard you're going to America." And Srila Prabhupada said, "No, no, the Bhagavatam is going to America and I'm simply carrying it." Which is wonderful, because Srila Prabhupada knew that it was the Bhagavatam which is going to make the revolution, as the Bhagavatam itself says, Tadvag Vishargo Janataga Viplavo Yasmin Pratishlo Kamabhaddhavatyati. Bhagavatam says this literature will create a revolution within society. And so Prabhupada carried those Bhagavatams with him, and indeed did create a revolution, is continuing to create a revolution, and will continue for many thousands of years creating a revolution in the impious lives of the world's civilization, as he writes. So we're very fortunate. This first canto of the Bhagavatam, really tried to study it. We just did a very, very quick overview, but really do try and study it, because you'll find so much amazing knowledge and insight in this wonderful canto. So now we'll carry on a little bit further, and we are going to be today discussing the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we're on schedule, so far so good. And we'll try to complete the entire second canto today, hopefully, and leave some time for questions and answers. So as we always say, by all means, type your questions into the chat box. I don't know if any of you are aware, but many questions were raised over the last couple of weeks that we couldn't answer in the session. So what we've done is we've put all those questions on the School of Bhakti forum online that you can go and visit. And right there, all of those questions, there's some illuminations on them. And we invite you to add more to the discussion. And by the end of this session, should you have more questions which weren't answered, then by all means go onto the website and add them onto the forum. Just to note, I have blocked anyone making an annotation. So every time you try, I get a request. So Santosh Prabhu, I would like to allow you to annotate, but not possible. Sorry. So we'll try to minimize the annotation. Okay, so before we begin, we just chant these wonderful prayers of Sanatana Goswami and pray for the blessings of our acharyas as we embark on this journey into the world of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sarva Shastra Vipyusha Sarva Vedeka Satphala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadhya Sarva Lokeka Drikprada Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabhu Kalidvanto Ditaditya Shri Krishna Parivartika Paramananda Pathaya Prema Varshaksharayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostute Madeka Bando Madsangin Madguru Madmahadhana Manishtaraka Madbhagya Madananda Namostute Sadhu Sadhu Tadain Tinicho Chataraka Anamuncha kadachinmam premnaret kantayo spura Omagyanitimirandhasya gyananjana shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Um, so, Hare Krishna. So, we are continuing reading the Bhagavatam as mentioned, and in the first canto, we explained that the main topic that was being described was adhikar. What is the adhikar of someone who is qualified to read and understand Srimad Bhagavatam? So through the different conversations that were taking place, the conversation between Sutta and the sages, the conversation between Narad and Vyas, and ultimately the conversation between Sukadeva and Parikshit, we're learning that the main qualification one must have to read Bhagavatam, to understand Bhagavatam, to absorb it, and fully capture the message within the innermost chambers of your heart, one must have desperation and a sense of surrender. So in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, Sutta, the sages especially, are very much aware of the difficulties of Kali Yuga. And in a beautiful verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 1:1-10. 1:1-10. There we go. Hopefully this works this week. There's a beautiful verse there explaining why spiritual life in Kali Yuga for people is so difficult. There in that beautiful verse, it's mentioned by the sages, Prayena alpaishaha sabhya kalavasmin yuge jana manda sumanda mantayo manda bhavya yupadrita. The sages begin to delineate the difficulties of people in Kali Yuga. And of course, these verses are unlimitedly deep, but the acharyas give us extra insight into the meaning of these verses. And in the commentary to this verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his infinite wisdom, gives an amazing explanation of the difficulties of someone in Kali Yuga. Delineating and breaking down this verse, he explains there's a sequence of problems that we go through. The first problem is Prayenal Payushaha Sabhya. So the first problem that people have in Kali Yuga is Alpa Ayusha. Their life is short and practically they have no time for spiritual cultivation, no time to hear spiritual topics, no time to cultivate the depth of connection with the supreme reality. But then he explains that even if someone makes time, even if someone opens up time in their life saying, no, this is important, we should do this. Then he says the next problem, Kalavasmin yuge jana manda. The next problem that one encounters is that they're lazy. So one can have the time, one can have the scope, but then we procrastinate or we think about the past or we're engaged otherwise. We have the time, we have the scope, but we're not able to utilize it properly. Then he says, but someone may make the time. They may be enthusiastic to learn the scriptures, to learn about the supreme reality. But then he says the next problem, manda sumanda matayo. have less intelligence. So even though one goes and reads the Bhagavatam or tries to hear, they cannot grasp. They read the scriptures, but because there's so many instructions, so many different angles, so many perspectives, they're not able to decipher what is the essence and what is the application in my own life. They hit another block. But then if one is smart, then one will realize, I don't know. So the way to overcome my lack of intelligence in understanding spiritual life is to go to someone who does know, to approach an authority. But then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, even if someone does that in their good wisdom, to go and approach an authority, what's the next problem? Manda Bhagya. People are unfortunate. And why are they unfortunate? Because the people that they approach to try to decipher misguide them, mislead them. Instead of approaching a teacher, they end up hearing from a cheater. And therefore, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, therefore, they're foiled on this point, that there are so many rogues, so many charlatans, so many imposters. But then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur goes even further and mentions that even if one has overcome the problem of not having time and has made time, even if one is not lazy, one is desirous, one is conscientious, even if one has overcome the problem of less intelligence by having the humility to approach someone, and even if someone is not unfortunate, but they're very fortunate, they've accessed the right knowledge, they've accessed the right person, they've accessed the right process, then the last nail in the coffin, the biggest problem still for everyone in Kali Yuga, he says, Upadrita, which means they're always disturbed. And this is basically our problem. Now, all of us, mostly we can say all of us on this call, to some extent, we've overcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've come to the point where we've accessed Srila Prabhupada's books, where we've accessed followers of Srila Prabhupada, where we've accessed the holy name, where we're sitting in front of the deities. But when we're doing all of these things, practically our mind is in 100 different places and we're not able to focus because we're so disturbed. The bumper sign in the car says, do not disturb, already disturbed. So our mind is so much disturbed by the problems of life. And what's more, that when we come and engage in spiritual practices, then we allow ourselves also to be further disturbed. When one is hearing Bhagavatam, when one is chanting the holy name, then there should not be any disturbance. If you're out there on your computer, then close down your email program, close down the internet browser. If you're on your phone, then make a resolution that while hearing Bhagavatam, I'm not going to look at any messages when the notifications come up. If you're in a room, try and close the door so that no one comes and disturbs you. Because if we're able to bring our full attention to the subject matter, then the Bhagavatam will go in, because that's what the first canto is explaining, that one must have adhikar. Otherwise, Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Bahu janma kare jadi shravana kirtan, tabutana paye Krishna pade premadhan. Bahu janma kare jadi shravana kirtan. You can do hearing and chanting for lifetimes and lifetimes. Tabutana paye Krishna pade prema dhan, but you will never get pure love of Krishna, because practically when we're doing the angas of bhakti, our mind is in 100 different places. So Parikshit had so many things to be disturbed about, if you think about it. I mean, he had serious problems. He was going to die in 7 days. I mean, what could be more disturbing than that? But Parikshit was able to overcome his disturbance of mind and give full focus to the message, because he understood this is a desperate situation. So we need to inculcate that desperation within us. We need to see that understanding Bhagavatam, chanting the holy name with full concentration, this is a matter of life and death. We have to do it. with incredible diligence and focus and absorption, and then we will see that amazing things begin happening when we engage in these angas of bhakti. So the first canto dealt with adhikar, that one must have this adhikar, this desirousness to hear, that comes from being surrendered, being desperate. And now in the second canto, the main subject will be described is sadhana. Now you've come to the point of having the desperation of surrender, the desperation to hear, the surrender to be open to the messages of Krishna. Now what the second canto will talk about is the sadhana, or the means to become absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the first section will talk about different manifestations of the Supreme and how we can absorb ourselves in the Supreme Lord. And then we'll hear about Parikshit's absorption. And like this, we'll hear all about the means to become fully engrossed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So let's now go into the second canto of the Bhagavatam. The second canto of the Bhagavatam is fairly short. It's only 10 chapters long, but incredibly profound. Also somewhat technical, but we'll find that there's an amazing transformation that occurs when we grasp this knowledge of the second canto. The acronym for the second canto is CUT. And you may have noticed already that detachment is an ongoing theme in the Bhagavatam. Sometimes you have YouTube videos, and then every 5 minutes there's like a little advert break. So then what happens in the Bhagavatam is every 5 minutes in the Bhagavatam there's like an advert break, which is an advert break of detachment. It just seems to be a recurring theme in every canto, in every pastime, in every passage, that unless and until we cut our attachment to the material world, we will never really be able to grasp the full spiritual reality. I used to travel across the country, and many times I stayed in the Leicester Temple, the old one that they used to have in the suburbs of Leicester. And there I always remember the picture of the deity of Panchatattva, and they had their hands out like this, giving Krishna prema. Panchatattva is so merciful, giving Krishna prema, giving. If we're holding on, if we're still holding on to the things of this world, if we're still attached, then we'll never be able to grasp those gifts. And attachment, it comes so like naturally to us somehow or other. We become attached very, very quickly. Even you see devotees in the class, they always end up sitting in the same spot in the temple room. When they chant their japa, they sit in the same spot. Even me, I don't have none of us have our own room or our own bed. We just sleep on the floor where we can. But even me, I have my floor space that's set aside, that's reserved. And it's right next to a bookshelf. I sleep right next to a bookshelf with my head next to the books, hoping that while I'm sleeping, all the knowledge will come in. So we have this tendency to get attached to a certain place or a certain thing or a certain person, or attachment comes so naturally to us. But we must learn to cut that attachment. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave the example of a wedding party that was rowing all night. And, they rowed into the moonshine, rowing on this, for hours in the nighttime they were rowing. And then as the sun rose in the morning, they found they were exactly in the same place. How is it possible? Because the anchor was down. The anchor was down. So many things we do in spiritual life, but the anchor of material attachment is very much still rooted in the material world. And therefore, Bahujanma kare jadi shravana kirtan prabhutana paye Krishna pade prem. Therefore, one does not make that journey to Goloka because the anchor is still down. So here, I'm not going to read the whole excerpt because of time, but Prabhupada's making the point that the sadhus cut off our attachment to this world by their razor-sharp words. This verse we've quoted in previous sessions already. Shanta evasya chindanti mano vyasangam ukti bi. Ukti means speech. So a sadhu has sharpened speech, sharpened words, which cut one's attachment to the material world. So I do want to just spend some time before we go into the second canto talking about detachment. Because as I said, detachment is a running theme in the Bhagavatam. And as devotees, we need to know how to cultivate an appropriate detachment, yet still be functional, dutiful, responsible, and active members of the world. Because what sometimes happens when we come to Krishna consciousness is we hear all of this knowledge about how the material world is temporary, how material achievements are transitory, how material relationships are ultimately phantasmagoria. And we hear all of this knowledge which inculcates a detachment. And sometimes it means we end up looking at the world and we think like, I have nothing to do with this world. I have no enthusiasm for the world anymore. I have no ambition. I have no drive. I have no, I don't feel like I have a purpose in this world anymore. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Sometimes devotees we can also feel like this, that we have no relationship with the world anymore. When we get this transcendental knowledge, it's almost like we can't function as a normal person in the world. One time my mom came to me and I could sense her complete frustration, and she just looked at me and said, "Can't you just be a normal person?" And the truth of the matter was, once you accept, you can't be a normal person. You can't be a normal, because now we think differently to people in the world. We have a different lifestyle to the people of the world. Our conversation or our subject matters of interest are different to people of the world, and our goals are different to people in the world. So how can we be normal? So there's a kind of dilemma there, that how do we live in this world, have that detachment, but still continue on with enthusiasm and not become dysfunctional or irresponsible or uninterested in everything? That is really like how to find that balance. And therefore, what I want to share with you is that the Bhagavatam actually talks about devotional detachment. So we can see that spiritual life can go through different stages. Before we even take up spiritual life, we're in the stage of material life. And in that stage of material life, our vision is very much that we're looking at the world because we're trying to enjoy the world. The mood is one of attachment. This is called the path of karma, where we act, we get reactions, and we become more and more entangled in the complexities of materialistic life. And the result of all of that is frustration, because Krishna says in the Gita, Yehi samsparsha jaboga dukkha yonaya evate. That one who tries to get pleasure from this material world, dukkha yonaya evate, it will ultimately bring distress. So in this stage, we're really just looking at ourselves, our selfish life, our material enjoyment, and how we can get as much as we want. We're attached. As we take up spiritual life in the beginning, and we hear about all this knowledge of the temporary nature of the world, it immediately gives us a sense where we want to look away from the world, where we think the world is useless. We want to escape it. It doesn't hold any meaning for us. We're not excited by the things of the world anymore. And our mood is very much a mood of detachment. And this is very much based on the path of Gyan. And the result of that is we get some peace, because we're able to distance ourselves from material enjoyment that ultimately brings problems. And so it's some progression. But there, the relationship with the world the things of the world, the people of the world, is that we're still thinking about ourselves, but we're thinking in a spiritual way at least. Now, many devotees, I would say, are in this stage where they're not able to kind of really connect with the world anymore, and their practice of spiritual life is very much disconnected from the world around them. Now, in mature spiritual life, we're not looking at the world trying to enjoy it. We're not looking away from the world trying to escape it. But what we're doing is we're looking beyond the world, and we're seeing that this world can be utilized to ultimately go beyond this world. In this stage of spiritual life, we look at the things around us. We look at the situation that we find ourselves in. We look at the people who surround us. We look at the duties that Krishna has given us, and we see that all of these things can be utilized to help me get closer to Krishna. And therefore, the mood is not attachment or detachment, but very much one of engagement. And this is really what Bhakti Yoga is. And then in this stage, we begin to see that, yes, we're detached from the world, but the world can also be engaged as a means to go ultimately beyond the world. And this is really the stage that we have to go to. Otherwise, we can, as devotees, just be kind of living in this world, but be very, very disconnected. And that can sometimes be problematic. So the Bhagavatam does speak strongly about certain things to inculcate a detachment within us. But then Bhagavatam also does give the other perspective, which is that if you use those things devotionally, they can help. For example, Bhagavatam, you'll read sections where it talks about how family life is a deep, dark well. Prahlad Maharaj says to Hiranyakashipu, Hitvatmapatam grihamandakutam vanam gato yadharimashrayeta. He said, your family life is like a deep, dark well, and no one will hear your cries. But then we also hear in the Bhagavatam, Griheshvavi satam chapi pumsham kushalakarmanam. That family life is amazing. It can be a place where amazing activities can be performed. In the third canto, it's explained that family life is like a fort in which one can be protected from all the temptations of the material world. And so which is it? Which is it? Is family life a deep, dark well, or is it a fort? The deep, dark well statements are meant to warn us not to try to enjoy family life for our own sense pleasure. But then the Bhagavatam will go on and give statements about family life, saying how if one utilizes family life in the right way, then it can actually be a great boon. Even it's interesting, you take the body, for example. You'll hear in the 5th canto of Bhagavatam, Rishabdev says, Ashanapi kleshada ashadeha. When he wants to describe the material body, the body that we have, he uses the Sanskrit word kleshada. The material body is kleshada. What does that mean? Da means to give, and klesha means misery. So the Sanskrit word that Rishabdev uses to explain what the body is, kleshada, literally means that thing which gives you misery. But then later on in the Bhagavatam, if you fast forward 2 cantos to the 7th canto, then Prahlad Maharaj says, Komared acharat prabhyo dharman bhagavatanita durlabham manusham janma tad apyad dhruvam arthadam. Prahlad Maharaj uses a different word to describe the body. He doesn't call it kleshada, he calls the material body arthada. Da means to give, artha means great benefit, great value. You can get something very substantial from it. So what is it? Which one is the body? Is it kleshada or is it arthada? Yes, the Bhagavatam says it's kleshada to remind us, don't try and enjoy this body. Because if you do, it will just give you more and more distress. the Bhagavatam also says the material body is artada. If you utilize it properly, then it will give you the best benefit possible. And therefore, we must realize that the Bhagavatam is giving us a vision of detachment. Detachment is a constant theme in Bhagavatam, but that detachment doesn't mean we just run away from everything and leave everything behind, but rather it means that we don't try and enjoy the world in a way that will ultimately bring us frustration. So what's the methodology of the Bhagavatam? It will make us detachment. It talks about detachment from the material world, but it will simultaneously have beautiful passages where it talks to you about attachment to the spiritual reality and the spiritual benefits that everything in this material world can give you. The Bhagavatam will give us science and philosophy, a lot of analytical passages which help us understand what the realities of life are. But the Bhagavatam will also give you many pastimes and practical lessons which help you to realize how to be a better person and how to ultimately fall in love with the most enchanting person in creation, which is Krishna. And the Bhagavatam will give lots of warning and caution, but it will also give great hope and inspiration. So the reason I'm raising this is because the second canto is very much dealing with this. It's a lot about detachment. There's a lot of science and philosophy here. There's a lot of intricate knowledge, which sometimes some people read these cantos of the Bhagavatam and they think, this is not for me. I thought the Bhagavatam was all about Krishna's name, fame, form, qualities, and pastimes. Why do I have to read about all of these things? But the point is, only when we're detached from the material world can we actually develop attachment for Krishna. Only when we've got the science and philosophy of what this material world is, can we actually enter into Krishna's pastimes and understand the practical lessons for our life. Only when we're sufficiently scared of Maya can we get the hope and inspiration of connecting with Krishna. And therefore, the Bhagavatam gives a complete presentation. And so when we're going through cantos like Canto 2, which we're going to go through today, there are sometimes very technical sections which are meant to inculcate detachment within us. And sometimes those technical sections are very difficult for devotees to read. And oftentimes what happens is it's a case of, in these chapters, we open the chapter, we start on the page, and as we're reading through the chapter, it's almost like we're just counting down for it to finish because none of it is registering in our minds. Yet we must be patient because all this knowledge of the Bhagavatam will help us to gain and forge a deeper relationship with Krishna. Therefore, Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Siddhanta boliye chite nakara alash, iha hoite Krishna lage sudrida manas. Siddhanta boliye chite nakara alash. Do not be lazy when it comes to understanding philosophical conclusion. Iha hoite Krishna lage sudrida manas. One's mind will become sudrida, very fixed by that philosophical discussion, and with a fixed mind, one will be able to fully give their heart to Krishna in pure love. And so this is the methodology of the Bhagavatam. And so in this canto, the first chapters are all about see, connect, because in the beginning of the conversation between Sukadeva and Parikshit, Sukadeva is going to give different options of how one can connect to the Supreme Lord, how one can become absorbed in the Supreme Lord. And then he's going to conclude by explaining that Bhakti is the highest, Bhagavan is the original, and if you do these things, then you will experience a complete change of heart. The second section of the Bhagavatam in the second canto from chapters 4 till 7 are dealing with universal creation. So having talked about how to connect to the spiritual reality, the natural question of Parikshit Maharaj is, well, why did we become disconnected from that spiritual reality in the first place? So then he begins asking about the universal material creation. Why did it come about? How did it come about? When did it come about? what's the creation, maintenance, annihilation of this cosmos that we see around us. And therefore we hear a whole description in a conversation between Narad and Brahma, all about universal creation. And then the canto ends with T, total theology, because what we hear at the end of this canto, after hearing the conversation between Brahma and Narad, we hear about Brahma's birth, how he found out about his purpose in life and the service that Krishna wanted him to do, and how Krishna ultimately revealed the Bhagavatam to him at the dawn of creation in 4 verses, and how those 4 verses of the Bhagavatam then expand into 10 subjects, which encompass the total theology of Srimad Bhagavatam and the total theology of Krishna consciousness. So that's basically the overview of the second canto of the Bhagavatam. I hope you're all with me. Maybe second.
Come and bring it here.
Here?
Said Laura reposted it.
What?
Didn't do.
Okay. Maybe Sam, I don't know if there are any questions so far before I continue going through the Bhagavatam, just to kind of break it up a little bit.
At the moment, we've only had one question. I don't know if you want to take that or if you want to continue. Question?
Yeah, I can take it.
Okay, so they were talking about what you were mentioning in the start about how we focus our mind. They wanted if you could maybe elaborate on how more methods of focusing the mind.
When I was talking about being disturbed.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bhagavatam says our main problem is that we're always disturbed and we're not able to bring attention. So whenever we want to bring attention to any activity, the first thing is we need to know the importance of that activity. When we realize the importance of something, then naturally we will give attention to it. So how do we then inculcate that sense of importance of chanting, that importance of hearing Bhagavatam, that importance of devotional service with mind, everything engaged in total absorption? How do we inculcate that urgency? Of course, one good way is to spend time with those people who have that urgency. Therefore, sadhu sangha, sarva shastra koi, lavamatra sadhu sangha, sarva siddhi hoy. We feed off the conviction and inspiration of others. And therefore, associating with saintly people, just by hearing them, as we've mentioned in previous sessions, that urgency will come within us. So there is hearing from sadhus, which is very, very important. Then there is just our own determination and discipline to bring discipline to our spiritual activities, at least on an external level. So that means when we're reading, to not allow oneself any scope to be disturbed. To make a point that when I read Bhagavatam, I turn my phone off. When I chant japa, I don't have any conversations with anyone in the middle. That discipline, because one very, very important thing is that when we, let's see if this is going to work. Remember this. Oh God. Attention ultimately will bring attraction. And attraction over time will lead to attachment. So now you're asking me the question of how to be more focused, and I'm telling you, be more attentive. So it almost seems like you're not really giving me an answer here. But the point here is that we just have to apply ourselves appropriately. So there is the inspiration that comes from the sadhus, and then ultimately we have to have the discipline of trying to do it in its proper way. We have to try to do it according to the prescribed method that's been given. Like in the Bhagavat Mahatmyam, it's talked about superior listeners, and different analogies are given of superior listeners. And one of the analogies is given of a fish. That a superior listener is like a fish, because a fish, when they see, their eyes don't even blink. So somehow or other, we have to just be disciplined when we hear. We have to be disciplined when we chant. We have to be disciplined in the attention that we bring, because that disciplined attention will ultimately bring attraction, and that attraction will mature into attachment. So that is something we can all do, because we're in class and we're constantly checking our phones, myself included. We're listening to this class, and how many other things are you multitasking at the moment? We're doing japa and, preparing what we're going to do in the day. So somehow or other, to have that discipline is very, very important. So I think it's a mix of discipline and inspiration, both. Sam, is there any other question?
Thank you, Varun. That's good for now, I think.
Move on? Okay, we'll move on then. So let's now continue on with discussing Srimad Bhagavatam. So we begin in the first canto. Now remember, we remember in the first chapter, sorry. Now remember, in the first canto, we heard all about how Parikshit got cursed, and now he's come to the bank of the Ganga, and he's come now to inquire from Sukadev Goswami. So when Parikshit comes, many people have assembled there, many great sages. They know something amazing is going to happen here. And in the midst of all of them, the great sage Sukadev Goswami comes. Now, so much we could say about Sukadev Goswami, but it's explained that Sukadev Goswami, before he became Sukadev Goswami, was Radharani's parrot right there in Sri Vrindavan Dham. And when Krishna and Radharani left the world, then he was as a parrot flying around with no way to mitigate his separation. And he was going everywhere, flying around everywhere, trying to find somewhere where he could hear about Krishna. Because if you're not with Krishna, but if you hear about Krishna, then that will mitigate your separation. So he was looking, where can I hear Hari Katha? And then he chanced upon Shiva and Parvati. Parvati had pleased Shiva very much. So Parvati asked her good husband, can you recite Srimad Bhagavatam for me? So there, right there, Shiva sat down and put his trishul into the ground and began reciting Bhagavatam, and Parvati was listening. And really, she wanted to hear all about Krishna in the 10th canto, but Shiva began from canto 1, speaking so many things. And Sukadev, as the parrot, came there, and he was also listening. Of course, Shiva thought no one else was listening, only Parvati is listening. So as Shiva began the katha, then he was asking her, okay, Parvati, shall I continue? She said, yes. Shall I continue? Yes. We got to the 10th canto. Shall I continue? Yes. And then midway through the 10th canto, shall I continue? And then Sukadev the parrot mimicked Parvati. Yes, continue. So Shiva continued. He continued all the way to the final verses of the Bhagavatam. And then he opened his eyes and realized this parrot was listening to the whole thing. He said, no one was supposed to listen to this katha, only Parvati. So he began chasing the parrot, and the parrot flew all the way to Badrik Ashram. And there, the parrot disappeared into the wife of Vyasadeva. So Shiva turned up. Where is that parrot? I will kill that parrot with my trishul. Vyasadeva said, you have already spoken Bhagavatam. This parrot has become deathless. You do no point now, nothing you can do. So that Sukadev took shelter in the wife of Vyasadeva, and that Sukadev had become so spiritually advanced that he was so fearful of materialistic life that he actually never wanted to come out of Vyasadev's wife's womb. So he remained there for 16 years, after which, having the reassurance of Krishna, finally Sukadev Goswami emerged from Vyasadev's wife. And immediately as Sukadev Goswami came out, then he immediately walked away from home for a life of renunciation. And only when Vyasadeva had some of the Brahmanas chant some exquisite verses from the Bhagavatam, talking about how merciful Krishna is, how beautiful Krishna is, when Sukadev heard those verses, then he was attracted. Let me come back. And then he came back. And indeed, then Vyasadeva taught the entire Bhagavatam to Sukadev Goswami. So that Sukadev Goswami, who had heard from Vyasadeva, was now standing in front of Maharaj Parikshit. And in response to Maharaj Parikshit's initial questions, he will now reveal different ways in which one can be absorbed in the form of the Lord. So this was Parikshit's question. Tatascha chava prithyam imam praprichya vishrabhya vipra iti kritatayam sarvatmana mriyamanescha krityam shuddham cha tatra mrishata bhiyakta. O trustworthy Brahmanas, I now ask you about my immediate duty. Please, after proper deliberation, tell me of the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, and specifically of those who are just about to die. This is incredible. Parikshit asks this question upon which the whole Bhagavatam is based. Of course, we look at this question and we just think, well, that's the natural question you would ask. But we have to ask ourselves, would we ask such a question? What is the quality of our questions? Because the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life, determines the quality of your wisdom. Parikshit knew how to ask the best questions. His question was so good that when Sukadev Goswami heard it, he said, Varyane sate prashna krita loka hitam ripa atmavid samatam pumsha shrotavya dishiya pura. He says, what a question you've asked. This is an amazing question. We have to learn to ask good questions in life. What questions are we asking Krishna? Every day when we go to sleep, we're asking questions to Krishna. In the Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada writes, every day when we wake up in the morning, we're asking questions. What questions are we asking? Just like now the COVID crisis is going on, what questions are we asking in this? What questions are people asking? Sometimes out of fear, they're asking the questions like, what will happen to me? How will I maintain myself? What will the world look like in 6 months' time? Or we could be asking different questions, more progressive questions. Sometimes in this crisis out of anxiety or frustration, we're asking, like, why did God do this? Why is there so much suffering in the world? We could be asking more progressive questions. Like, what am I supposed to learn from this? What unique opportunity is Krishna providing me in this situation? The quality of our questions ultimately will develop the quality of our wisdom. Just like one person once came to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and he said, can you see God? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, rubbish question. That's a rubbish question to ask. Because even if I say, yes, I can see God, how is that question and that answer to that question going to help you see God? I always tell the story of Stanislavski Lech, who was captured in a concentration camp by the Nazis. So every day he was seeing people die before his eyes. In that concentration camp, there were traumatized people around him, as you can imagine. And every one of those single people in that concentration camp was asking, Why did God allow this to happen? How could there be such evil people in the world? Why am I suffering? People were asking all of these questions. Stanislavski Lek, he had a different question. Every day he was questioning, how can I get out of here? Everyone looked at him and he said, this is a crazy question. No one's ever made it out of here alive. Why are you asking such a question? But Lek's question every day was, how can I get out of here? One day, he peered over one of the walls and he saw a horrific sight. He saw a sight of hundreds of dead bodies which had been gassed, piled up, hundreds of corpses. What question would you ask when you saw all those corpses? Most people were asking the question, how could they be suffering? How could these terrible things happen? How could God be so cruel? But what was Stanislavski Lek's question? How can I get out of here? So when he saw those dead bodies, he had an idea. In the middle of the night, he took all of his clothes off, he jumped the wall, and he jumped into that pile of dead bodies. In the morning, the truck came, shoveled up all the dead bodies, drove off, dumped all the bodies in a landfill. Stanislavski Lek just stood, sat there, piled under dead bodies and didn't move until he heard all the vehicles go. And then what did he do? He made his way through all of those dead bodies, made it out of the hole, ran for his life, and lived to tell the tale. What is the lesson to learn? The lesson to learn is because he was asking a different question, he saw and got a different answer. Everyone else was asking questions, but they were asking the wrong questions. So next time you come in front of Krishna, ask yourself, am I asking good questions? Next time you come in front of a saintly person, ask yourself, am I asking good questions? Next time you go to bed and are thinking and trying to make sense of life, ask yourself, am I asking the right questions? Because if you learn the art, perfect questions, perfect answers. If we ask the right questions, Krishna can give us so much information. So here, Sukadev says, Varyane sete prashna. What a great question. What is the duty of someone who's about to die? Let me tell you. Tasmad Bharata Sarvatma Bhagavan Ishvaro Hari Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha Smartavyascha Chata Bhayam. If you want to be free of all miseries, hear about, glorify, remember the Supreme Lord. He's the controller and the savior from all miseries. So Sukadev just gave him the conclusion right there. But Sukadev was smart. He knew that in this assembly, so many different sages have assembled. There's Bharatvaj, there's Idmavahu, there's Narad, there's Vyas, there's Gautama, and all of these different sages have different philosophies because Vedanta is just one darshan. There are different ways in which one can see the Vedic knowledge. So he knew there were many transcendentalists who had different visions. So what he began doing is explaining that there are many different ways in which you can become absorbed in the Supreme Lord. And he began outlining different objects of meditation. Before going on that yoga ladder and explaining all the different aspects of the absolute truth that one can become absorbed in, the first thing Sukadev Goswami does in the beginning of the 7th canto is he completely slates material life. In a series of verses, he just begins to explain that anyone who tries to find happiness in the material world is going to lose. Now, we've heard that again and again and again, but Sukadev drills it again and again and again. Shrotavyadini Rajendra Nrinam Shanti Sahasrasa Apasyatam atmatattvam griheshu grihamedina. He says people are so engrossed in material life, they haven't opened their ears to hear about something higher. Dehapatya kalatra deshva atmasainyasya satsvapi yesham pramato nidanam pashyana pinapashyati. These materialistic people, they're investing all their hopes in temporary relationships, temporary arrangements, temporary things, all temporary things that are ultimately meant for destruction. All of these things are fallible soldiers, he says. Nidraya riyate naktam vyavayena chavavayah divacharte haya rajan kutumba varanenava. He says people are wasting their time. In the day, they're just working hard and hard and hard to earn money. And at night time, they're wasting their time in sleeping and sexual enjoyment. Svavidvarahostra kure samstuta purusha pashu nayat karna patopeto jatuna magadagraja. He says, man is heavy. Men who are like hogs, dogs, camels, and asses. They don't reach the goal of life. Why hogs, dogs, camels, and asses? Because hogs will eat anything. Dogs are continuously barking and defending. Camels, they look like they're always about to fall asleep. And asses just engaged in sexual enjoyment. So this is basically animalistic life. Men who are like hogs, dogs, camels, and asses means men who are simply engaged in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, using all their advanced intelligence just to do the basic activities in a more refined way. He says, this is crazy. So he says to Parikshit, we must go beyond this. So what he then begins to do is explain different ways in which one can become absorbed in the Supreme. So now we know that the Supreme, what Sukadeva explains through the Bhagavatam is that the Supreme has different elements, different aspects to the Supreme Absolute Truth. We'll find a verse in the Bhagavatam. Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan vishadyate. That the Supreme Lord can be perceived as Brahman, as Paramatma, as Bhagavan. These are different aspects of the Absolute Truth. So now, Sukadeva will give different options. You want to become absorbed? I've told you material life is useless. Now become absorbed in the Supreme. Now let me tell you different ways in which you can become absorbed in the Supreme. So the first thing he describes, because he knows some of the sages are attracted to this. So he describes this to let them know, I know what you're doing. I know what you're thinking. He says one way to become absorbed into Supreme is through the universal form. So just like Krishna describes the universal form to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, Sukadeva explains the universal form to Parikshit in the first chapter of the second canto. Of course, it's slightly different. The universal form of the Gita and the Bhagavatam are slightly different. The universal form of the Bhagavad Gita is known as Vishvarup. It's a real form. Krishna shows how the whole universe, past, present, future, all living entities are contained within his own body. And in that sense, it's a real form because Krishna is showing how everything is situated within him. The universal form that Sukadeva describes to Parikshit in the Bhagavatam is known as Virat Rupa, which is slightly different. It's an imaginary form. So what Sukadeva explains is that different parts of the universe, different planetary systems can be seen as different parts of the Lord's body. We can look at Patal and see that that's the souls of the Lord. We can look at Rasatal and see that that's like the heels of the Lord. We can look at Mahatal and see that's like the ankles of the Lord. We can look at the sun and see that this is like the eyeballs of the Lord. We can look at the trees and see like this is the hairs of the Lord. We can look at the rivers and see this is like the veins of the Lord. In this way, Sukadev is giving one a conception of how to perceive the Lord through his energy. So I guess in modern terms, this would be known as pantheism. You find, for example, Native Americans, they worship nature. And through nature and seeing how this nature is ultimately part of the universal body of the Lord, they begin to develop their relationship with the Lord. So it's kind of like an indirect way of meditating on the Lord. Like, say, for example, we say the mind, our mind is A. So our mind is attracted to material nature and the sense objects. Okay? So what the universal form and this meditation does is it shows that the material nature is the body of the Lord. So now, because A equals B and B equals C, it's an indirect way to actually focus on the Lord. So instead of seeing all of these things in nature as an object of one's enjoyment, rather one sees it as part of the body of the Lord. And in this way, one begins to make a connection to the Supreme Lord. Krishna does this in the Gita as well. For example, he says, Rasoham apsukonteya prabhashmi shashishuryayo pranava sarva vedeshu shabdake paurusham rishu. He says, I'm the taste of water. I'm the light of the sun and the moon. I'm the ability in man. So by perceiving all of these things, we automatically then get some connection with the Lord. So the first thing that Sukadev Goswami explains is the universal form and how one can become absorbed in the Lord by becoming absorbed in the universal form. Later on, he goes a bit further and he says you can actually go further. You can actually perceive the Lord as a person, someone who's active, someone who's actually reciprocating with you. And this is known as Paramatma realization. So in the universal form, it's almost still like an impersonal relationship with the Lord, because there's no personality, there's no exchange, there's no reciprocation. So now a little bit higher than that is to perceive that the Lord is within the heart. The Lord within the heart, the Paramatma, is helping me at every step, giving me knowledge, giving me remembrance, giving me forgetfulness, whatever I require on my journey. The Lord is the Upadrasta, the overseer, and the Anumanta, the Paramitta. And in this way, he explains, just as Krishna also explains in the 6th chapter of the Gita, the process of Ashtanga Yoga. You want to connect with Paramatma, you go through the process of Ashtanga Yoga. Yama, which means things you shouldn't do, don'ts. Niyama means do's. Asana means postures. Pranayam means breathing. Pratyahara means removing your senses from the sense objects. And then he explains, dhyana means meditation. Samadhi means trance. Dharana means increased focus. So by going through this Ashtanga Yoga process, one actually begins to connect with the Lord who is within the heart. And then more details are given. There are two types of yogi. There is a detached yogi who then goes on the direct path of Ashtanga Yoga and immediately achieves liberation. And then there is the attached yogi who then is not able to go on that direct path and therefore has to go on the path of Krama Mukti. Krama means step by step. So that yogi has to go step by step, remove the soul from the subtle body, then go through different planetary systems, ultimately pierce the coverings of the system, and in that way gain release from the material energy. It's very difficult to understand all these things. I mean, How will we understand this Astanga Yoga process of connecting with the Paramatma? I mean, to stay awake for 1.5 hours doing japa is difficult enough. How will we even do this? We can't even understand it conceptually. How will we do it? Therefore, Sukadev gives more options. He says some people go to the demigods. Dhanam dehi, rupam dehi. They want some material boons. So they go to the demigods who are agents of the Supreme Lord. And this is another indirect way of connecting with the Supreme Lord. If you want good health, then go to Surya. If you want powerful senses, then worship Indra. If you want to have a lot of knowledge, then worship Brihaspati. And in this way, many, many different ways in which one can worship the demigods. So ultimately, what Sukadev basically is describing is different ways in which one can be absorbed in the Supreme Lord, because he's told Parikshit, that's basically what you have to do. Your life is coming to an end. You have to get absorbed in the Supreme Lord. He says you could do it through the universal form. You could do it through Paramatma. You could even do it through demigods. But I'm telling you, don't do any of these. Rather, what you should do is worship the Lord in his personal feature as Bhagavan. And therefore, in this very beautiful verse, he says, Akama sarvakamova moksha kama udariti Tivrena bhakti yogena yajaita purusham param. Don't worry about all these different systems. Whether you have no desires, whether you have all desires, however, whatever state you find yourself in. Tivrena bhakti yogena yajaita purusham param. Engage in bhakti to Bhagavan with tivrena, which means intensity, and everything will come. And therefore, the conclusion of this first section of the Bhagavatam, chapters number 1 to 3, is that we have to connect to the Lord. That is the goal of life. There are different ways to connect to the Lord, and there are different aspects of the absolute truth that we can connect to. But the basic point that's being made is that the supreme object of meditation is Bhagavan. The supreme process to become absorbed is bhakti. And the supreme identity we seek is to be a bhakta. And if one engages in bhakti to Bhagavan by becoming a bhakta, then chapter 3, the title is Change in Heart. One's heart will change. And then the Bhagavatam says, and if your heart is not changing, Tadasmasadam hridayam batedam yadviyamane harinamanyay na vikriyetha thayada vikaro netre jalam katrureshu harsha. One's heart doesn't change. If by practicing bhakti to Bhagavan and becoming a bhakta, by taking up that process, tears are not falling from the eyes, one's hairs are not standing on end, one's body is not trembling in ecstasy, then there can only be one explanation, which is that one has a heart which is steel framed. And what does that mean? A steel framed heart means a heart which has become so hard because of offenses. And of all offenses, inattention is one of the most dangerous. And therefore, it's coming back to the point that Pariksha is the ideal person because he has no inattention, he's completely focused. And anyone who imbibes that focus in their sadhana, which is what Canto 2 is about, will become absorbed in the Lord. And so that is basically what the first part of the second canto is describing. Sukadeva and Parikshit begin their conversation. Parikshit's question is, what should I do? I'm about to die. Sukadeva's answer is, you have to hear about, chant, glorify the Supreme Lord. But what he does, knowing that there are many, many diverse people who may have many, many diverse ideas, he says, you could do this, worship the universal form. You could do this, worship Paramatma. You could do this, worship the demigods. But my advice to you is, go beyond all of this. Go beyond Brahman, go beyond Paramatma, and simply worship the Supreme Lord. Because not only is it the easiest, not only is it the most advanced, not only does it give one the most intimate connection, but it's what all the scriptures conclude. And even Brahma, who studied all the Vedas many, many times, agrees with this conclusion. So I think I'll stop there, and maybe we can take some questions if there are some. Any questions?
Yes, a few questions came in. So someone was asking that we heard about the history of Sukadeva Goswami and how he was already feeling separation from Radha and Krishna. So why was it that he was described as a Brahmavadi, or he seemed to have an impersonal beginning of his life?
Yes, this is a complex question. You see, even when we talk about Sukadeva Goswami, the background that I gave of Sukadeva Goswami being a parrot and then taking shelter in Vyasadev's wife's womb like that, that's one story. There are other stories about Sukadeva Goswami's previous birth. And then how do we reconcile that? That how can there be different stories about who Sukadeva Goswami is? And it's explained that there's something called Kalpa Veda, which means the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees occur differently in different days of Brahma. So when we hear about Sukadeva Goswami being a Brahmavadi, at least I've not come across something where that can be clearly understood, because as you're mentioning, it very clearly seems to indicate that he was attracted to Radha Krishna and feeling that separation all the way through. So I don't have an answer to that apart from saying that there are different stories of Sukadeva Goswami's history. And maybe when it's relating Sukadeva Goswami being a Brahmavadi, it may be talking about another instance of Sukadeva Goswami's history in universal timescales.
Thank you. So another question is that we're hearing in this chapter that Sukadeva is giving descriptions of an imaginary universal form and other things which seem impersonal, Ashtanga Yoga, etc. So why is he speaking this when he's in an audience of very advanced devotees?
They are very advanced devotees, but they all have different darshans, different ways of looking at the Vedic literature. And therefore, it's necessary for Sukadeva Goswami to acknowledge them, accept their level of spiritual realization as something very substantial and bona fide. But then now he's going to show that something further. Krishna uses the same strategy in the Gita, if you look. Like chapters 2 through 5, he's basically telling Arjuna that act in the world, dedicate your activities to me, don't try and escape, don't go to the forest. And then in the 6th chapter entitled Dhyana Yoga, Krishna says to Arjuna, okay, you want to go to the forest? Then this is what you have to do. You have to lay down a deer skin. You have to practice complete celibacy. You have to sit up straight, meditate on the tip of your nose with back perfectly straight. You have to remove your consciousness from the external and bring it within, connect it with the Paramatma. Arjun looks at him and says, Vayur eva sudushkaram. Krishna, to control the mind is more difficult than to control the wind. I can't do it. And the whole strategy is that Krishna is saying that, yes, you can do this, you could do this, you maybe want to do this, maybe you're thinking of this, but let me tell you, there's something beyond all of this. So sometimes it's necessary not just to tell people what they should do, but to explain why they shouldn't be doing other things as well. And therefore, Sukadeva Goswami goes through a progression. Another question?
Yeah, we can do one more.
Take a couple more. Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about associating with sadhus and asking questions. So if we come before someone, often we can't think of a question to ask, or maybe there's not something natural. So should we not ask this question to sadhu, or should we miss the opportunity for association, or should we let something come naturally?
In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Tadvidi pranipatena parikrishna sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. The very foundation of a knowledge relationship with a sadhu is three things. Pranipat, which means submission. Pariprashna, which means questioning, humble inquiry. And sevaya, serving. So, to ask questions is an art, and we have to learn that art. You don't have to have a question every single time you meet a sadhu or a saintly person, but when the opportunity arises and it's relevant, one should take advantage of that opportunity. And oftentimes, if we don't have a question, 90% of the time is because we're not engaging with the subject matter deeply enough. Because if we actually were thinking about this philosophy that we're hearing and really deeply thinking about how to apply it to our life, you must have a question. And often speakers say that at the end of the class, like, either you guys, you know everything, or you didn't understand anything I said. So which one is it? Either you're self-realized soul, or it means you're not really interacting with anything that's being said on a deep level, because there should really be questions if you're a sadhaka. So, of course, some people are more, we're all of different natures. Some people are more analytical, inquisitive. They're able to generate many, many questions. But everyone should be able to ask good questions. And just as important as asking good questions is to be able to grasp the answer. And in that way, Prabhupada said, I didn't ask many questions to my spiritual master. I just asked him, how can I serve you? And every question I asked was basically, in the background of that question was this question: how can I serve? He said, practically, I only ever asked my guru one question: how can I serve? And every other question that I asked, it was basically just to answer this question of how can I serve, which was an interesting point. So yes, let us question, let us engage more deeply with the subject matter. That's why we set up a forum on School of Bhakti where you can list all your questions and then answer some of them as well. Please also answer some of the questions. And in that way, through questions and answers, one's understanding will become evolved. Because this is the methodology of Shastra, is all questions and answers. Sam, maybe one last question?
Sure, that was about all that was relevant to this topic. Would you like to take one that's
okay, sure. If there's one random one, we can take that.
So a few devotees are asking maybe if you have some advice on You talked a bit about it already, about going deeper into our reading and chanting, but if you have any more advice on this.
I mean, I mentioned two things, inspiration and discipline. It takes time to establish a relationship with Bhagavatam. And I've mentioned this point also many, many times. That in the beginning, when we even establish a relationship with someone in this world, it's often very, very superficial. We're just asking like almost like very superficial questions, and the connection is not so deep. But as we spend more time with each other, as we question each other, as we serve each other, then the relationship gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So we're hearing this wonderful poetic composition of Sanatana Goswami, who's saying, Madeka Bandhu, Mat Sangin, the Bhagavatam is my only friend, my constant companion. And we're thinking, wow, I wish I could have it. I wish I could do it. I wish I could have that connection. It will come, but one must invest. So invest means invest time reading, first of all. Second thing is invest time thinking. Then invest time applying. Invest time discussing with Vaishnavas. Invest time in serving the Shastra by trying to give it to others. Invest time in finding creative ways to glorify the Shastra. Just invest in the Shastra. And by investing in your relationship with Shastra, Krishna will reveal himself to you through the Shastra. Prabhupada says one will see Krishna in the pages of Bhagavatam. Well, who will see Krishna in the pages of Bhagavatam? One who has invested in their relationship with Bhagavatam. So we must find more and more ways to invest in our relationship with Bhagavatam. And that's our wealth. That is what we will carry at the end of life. The connection with the Bhagavatam, connection with the holy name. So invest and find ways to invest in the relationship. And don't ever think Bhagavatam's not for me, too complicated, too difficult, over my head. No. We're not understanding Bhagavatam on the level of the intellect. It's amazing. Sometimes we go out onto the street and intelligent people, scholarly people, academics, they can't understand Bhagavatam. And a simple person on the street reads the first canto and gets it. Because they're reading with a deeper connection, a deeper desirousness. So we must invest. So thank you very much. We'll take a 3-minute break, I guess, and keep posting your questions on the screen. And as I said, if we're not able to answer all the questions, then at the end of this session, please do just post them onto the forum, and let's get a real good discussion going. So thank you so much. I'll give you a few minutes to relax, get a Ekadashi snack, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki.
You are ready to go, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. Some feedback has come through. So just on the question of Sukadev Goswami, dear Kartik Chandrapuru, I'm very happy he's on the call to give us more insight. Explains that Sukadev Goswami is a Nitya Siddha. So he may appear as a sadhana siddha as many others do, many other personalities. So when we hear that he was a Brahmavadi or these things, we just understand that it's part of a leela or role that he's playing, but ultimately a Nitya Siddha. So I'm sure we can hear more about that in the future. So we're continuing on Srimad Bhagavatam. Sorry, I'm going very, very fast, but obviously the whole idea of this session is just to give you an overview so that by the end, you kind of know the scope of the second canto. So Now we're moving on. We've covered the first 3 chapters of the second canto, where Sukadeva Goswami has given almost a yoga ladder leading up to establishing that bhakti to Bhagavan is the highest. And now he will continue on and begin to describe about the next subject matter, which is universal creation. So Parikshit Maharaj has heard all about how we have to connect back to the reality. Everyone in this world is actually looking to connect back to the supreme reality. Once they did a survey and they asked people, what do you do to relax? So you know what the top 4 answers were? Sleep, go on holiday, take intoxication, and watch a movie. This is what the 4 things that people do when they want to relax. They sleep, they go on holiday, they take intoxication, and they watch a movie. Which is very, very interesting, because if you think about each one of those activities, each one of them are an escape from life, an escape from reality. When you sleep, you escape. When you go to a movie, you escape. When you go on holiday, you escape. When you take intoxication, you escape. But when you sleep, you have to wake up. When you go on holiday, you have to come back. When you take intoxication, you have to come down again. And when you watch a movie, well, at one point it ends. And right back there in the material world again. C.S. Lewis, the English writer, said, when I find within myself a desire which no experience of this world can fulfill, I must conclude I was made of another world. And that's basically the point that Bhagavatam makes, that we search for that connection. So Sukadeva has told Parikshit, make this connection, and that's when you'll find the satisfaction of the heart. But then the next question, the natural question comes, how did we become disconnected in the first place? How did this world come about? Why is it here? When did it arise? What's the creation, annihilation, the maintenance of this universal cosmos? What's it all about? And that's the natural question that Parikshit begins to question. Why did we become disconnected? And how is the material universe created? So of course, we know this question of why did the jiva come to the spiritual material world is a sure way in which ISKCON devotees give themselves a bad headache, because sometimes it's just one of those inconceivable questions that we can't fully grasp or get our head around completely. Srila Prabhupada seemed to say different things. In the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, in the pastime of Jay and Vijay, Prabhupada makes the statement that the conclusion is that not even a leaf can fall from Vaikuntha. But then later on, we read in Prabhupada's letters and his conversations that he often espoused a position where the jiva falls from the spiritual world down to the material world because of a desire to enjoy or experience separateness from Krishna. Sometimes acharyas give other positions, that the jiva came from a marginal position. So many different angles are given to try to decipher a clear answer to this question of how the jiva comes to the spiritual material world. And whichever position one takes, there will be inconceivable elements to it. And therefore, to try to conclusively answer this in a boxed way will be problematic. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada didn't focus too much. He obviously explained that when a house is on fire, then you don't go around looking for where it began. You just get out. And therefore, we shouldn't overcomplicate things by becoming bogged down in this question of the fall of the jiva from the spiritual world. The devotees have produced, ISKCON has produced a book called Our Original Position, which looks at different arguments which you can read. Ultimately, it will remain something which will be somewhat of a mystery to us. Parikshit wants to know about the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the material world, and therefore he starts putting his questions to Sukadeva Goswami to delve a little bit deeper. Parikshit is inspired. He wants the katha to continue. He wants the nectar flowing from Sukadev's mouth to just keep going, and therefore he's got questions lined up because he doesn't want him to stop. It's interesting. Many of these things, by the way, that I'm quoting, I've heard from our very dear friend Kartik Chandraprabhu, who wonderfully has taught us Bhagavatam and so many truths from the Bhagavatam, and who has so much taste for Bhagavatam. So we should obviously pay all respects to him for sharing these insights. But it's explained that Sukadeva Goswami, before you begin speaking, generally you recite a Mangalacharan. That's what you do at the beginning when speaking spiritual discourse. But at the beginning of the first canto, after hearing Parikshit's questions, Sukadeva was so enthusiastic to answer. He was so overcome by Parikshit's question and so desirous to give him the knowledge that he didn't even chant a Mangalacharan, he just went straight into discourse. And now at the beginning of the fourth chapter, Sukadeva begins to do a Mangalacharan because he actually forgot to do it in his ecstasy at the beginning. So after giving this Mangalacharan and hearing Parikshit's further questions, then what Sukadeva Goswami does is he says that these questions you're asking, Parikshit, are incredible. And you know what? These questions you're asking were questions which were asked by Narad Muni to his father Brahma many eons ago. So now, instead of me giving you answers, let me just dictate the conversation between Brahma and Narada Muni. And in this way now, the conversations of Srimad Bhagavatam are becoming more layered. So let's just recap that the Bhagavatam we're reading is the conversation between Sutta and the sages. In their conversation, they are outlining or recalling the conversation between Sukadeva and Parikshit. And now Parikshit has asked Sukadeva Goswami a question. So now Sukadeva is going to reply by reciting the conversation between Brahma and Narada. So as you go through Bhagavatam, try to keep up with the conversations that are taking place, because often we'll get to a point in the seventh canto, you get to a point where it's a conversation in a conversation, in a conversation, in a conversation, in a conversation, which is in a conversation. And it can become a little confusing. So just try to keep track that now we're hearing in this section the conversation between Brahma and Narad, which was related by Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. Now, as we discussed the topics of Bhagavatam, it was mentioned, Atra Sarga Visargascha. The first two topics of Bhagavatam are Sarga and Visarga. So Sarga means primary creation, and Visarga means secondary creation. Sarga or primary creation deals with elemental creation, and Visarga or secondary creation deals with the engineering of the universe. Sarga, primary elemental creation, is all about Mahavishnu and the elements coming from Mahavishnu. And the secondary engineering of the universe is all about Brahma, who takes those building blocks and then creates planetary systems, creates species, and in this way creates a facility and almost a theater for all of the souls to play out their desires. Sarga takes place at the beginning of Brahma's life. And Visarga takes place at the beginning of Brahma's day. And what we'll find is, again, we mentioned that all of these topics, Jiva Goswami says, is found in all cantos, but we'll find that each one has a emphasis, some content more in other cantos than others. So in cantos 2 and 3, one will find out more about Sarga, and particularly in canto 4, one will find out more about Visarga. So now, having asked about the creation of the material world to Sukadev Goswami narrates the conversation between Narada and Brahma. And now what will be explained is the process of Sarga, the process of how the original material energy comes from Mahavishnu, that Pradhan, which is in an undifferentiated state, in order to then develop the different elements and the different building blocks required for creation. That Pradhan is basically what the Lord does is creates an imbalance within the Pradhan, and within that imbalance then various modes of nature then are eventually manifested, and then from those modes of nature the various aspects of creation, the tanmatras, the senses, the mind, the sense devatas, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to attempt to explain all of this in detail. Conveniently, we don't have the time, and more importantly, I don't have the full intelligence to describe it to you in detail. We're still studying it ourselves. So this can be explored in your own time, in your own studies through various other books and lectures. But suffice it to say for now that these are the different elements that Brahma will now use in order to engineer the universe. So when Brahma is glorified, Narad Muni glorifies Brahma. He says, "You're the creator. You're amazing. You've done this huge job of, creating this whole universe." Brahma says, "Actually, people call me the creator, but I'm not the creator. The creator is one. That's Vishnu. I am simply an engineer. I am simply someone who takes the elements and then creates different things from those elements." And in this way, Brahma shows his humility. Why is the creation existing? This we already talked about to some extent. Giriraj Maharaj asked Srila Prabhupada, "Srila Prabhupada, why did Krishna create the material world?" Prabhupada just looked straight back at him and said, "Because you wanted it." In other words, we are not creationists. The material world doesn't begin from Krishna's desire. It doesn't begin from God's volition. The material world, the beginning of the material world is the desire of the living entity. And therefore, in order to facilitate that, the Lord creates the material. One time Prabhupada was walking, they were on a morning walk, and they walked past the children's playground. So the Prabhupada said, "What is this?" The devotee said, "Prabhupada, this is children's playground." Prabhupada turned around, he pointed with his cane at the city center skyscrapers, and he looked back at the other place. He said, "That's a children's playground, that's an adult's playground." So ultimately, what is this world? It's just a playground. It looks very, very serious. It looks very intricate. It's ultimately a playground created by Brahma in order for living entities to play out their material desires, eventually evolve their consciousness, and ultimately go back home, back to Godhead. So when did it come about? Here we're learning also in this section of Bhagavatam about universal timescales. So Brahma, as we know, lives for 100 years. In every one of his years, there's 360 days. A day of Brahma is called a kalpa. And in every day of Brahma, there's 14 manus. And in each manu, there's 72 divya yugas like that. 71, 71, yeah. So just in case you're interested, we are in the 28th divya yuga at the moment of the 7th manu. The 7th manu is known as Vaivashvata Manu. The Brahma overseeing our creation is 51 years old, and we're currently in the first day of his 51st year. And that would mean that at this point in Brahma's day, it's about 11:40 a.m. Just in case you were interested. That's the universal time scales within which we're functioning. How small we are. And here we are reading the Bhagavatam thinking that we will grasp the entirety of the material cosmos and the universe. Prabhupada said, what will you grasp with your tiny pea brain? Yeah. Why are we then learning about all of this? Will we even be able to grasp it, the enormity of it? The reason why all of this is described is because when we hear about the creation of the Lord, then it gives us an appreciation of Krishna's greatness. It gives us a realization of how tiny we are and insignificant we are. And it gives us faith that, oh my God, yes, the Vedic revelation does have a response, does have an answer to how the creation was made. It wasn't just that, well, God did it in this many days and that's it, story closed. No, there is an intricate explanation of how it was done. And when we have a realization of Krishna's greatness, when we understand how small we are, and when we have faith in the philosophy, then this automatically leads to greater bhakti. Because remember, the goal of Bhagavatam, prema pumartho mahan, is ultimately to develop prema. So one may say, what's all this need for all these analytical tan mantras and the mind and sense devatas and the pradhan and the mahatattva and kala and swabhava and all of these things interacting to create an imbalance? What's the need? The need is that it helps us to understand how amazing Krishna is, how small and insignificant we are, and it helps us to gain faith that yes, there is an explanation. Sometimes people look at this explanation and say, well, it's too far out. I mean, isn't the Big Bang far out? I mean, we go into a science museum and we hear, like all of these fantastic explanations about how supposedly the universe came about, how supposedly X billion years ago there was a change of the temperature in 1 degree and it caused this aspect, and people just accept it. If we look closely, is that not as fantastic or extraordinary or beyond the scope of our perception as the Puranic accounts of creation? They're both. So we should have an equal level playing field and understand that we can't really grasp this. Yeah, it has a role to play because it helps us in these ways to ultimately augment and develop our bhakti. After describing the universal creation, Sukadev goes on to another discussion between Brahma and Narad. And this 6th chapter is called Purusha Shukta Confirmed. Shukta, Su means very good. And Ukti means words. Ashukta is literally very good words, very nice explanations, very nice descriptions. The Purusha Shukta is basically a prayer that's recited by Brahma at the dawn of creation. It's also a prayer which the demigods utilize to pray to the Supreme Lord Kshirodakshaya Vishnu when they want the Lord to incarnate. And the Purusha Shukta is basically explaining the Supreme Lord, identifying Garbhodakshaya Vishnu as the supreme object of honor within the universe. And so this sixth chapter of the Bhagavatam is called Purusha Shukta Confirmed, because in the conversation between Brahma and Narad, the conclusions of whatever is described in Purusha Shukta is basically highlighted and underlined again in this chapter. And therefore this verse goes further, explaining the position of Vishnu and how all elements and everything, aham sarvasya prabhavo janmad ashya yaton vayadi taratas, that everything emanates from the Supreme Lord, and therefore confirming that Vishnu is indeed the source of everything. After describing that, the next discussions go on talking about the various incarnations of the Lord, and how through the agency of Vishnu, incarnations enter into this material world. So sometimes when you read in a dictionary, it will say Krishna is the 8th incarnation of Vishnu. True or not true? Well, Bhagavatam says, Etachamsha kalapumsha Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. No, Krishna is the Supreme Lord, Bhagavan Swayam. Even Vishnu comes from Krishna. So how can Krishna be the 8th incarnation of Vishnu? So the ultimate understanding is that Vishnu is ultimately God at work and Krishna is God at home. Everything comes from Krishna. But when we talk about Krishna being an incarnation of Vishnu, there is some truth in that statement, because when Krishna appears in the material world, then he appears through the agency of Vishnu. So if someone walks into a room through a door, then it doesn't mean that the door gave birth to that person. It just means that the person came through the door and was existing before the door. Similarly, in the same way, Krishna exists before everyone, before everything. Sarva Karana Karanam Govindam Adi Purusham, the original person. But when he enters the material world, he comes through the agency of Vishnu, and therefore sometimes it's concluded that Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu, which has some technical truth to it, but in the ultimate sense, Krishna is the source of Vishnu. So here were then some discussions that Brahma and Narad had centering around the universal creation and the activities of the Lord within that creation. And now we enter into the final chapters of the second canto, where Sukadev Goswami now will reveal to Parikshit the 4 verses which contain the essence of the Bhagavatam, explained by the Lord himself to Brahma at the time of creation. So having had his questions answered on the universe, Parikshit was satisfied, and then he opened up more questions. What did he ask about next? He asked about the soul, about samsara, about Vishnu's demigods, and many other aspects, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, how one should function within the universe. He asked about many, many different things. You can see Parikshit was just so smart. Probably even before Sukadev had begun speaking, he had his next list of questions already lined up, because he didn't want Sukadev to stop. He knew, I only have 7 days. I need to keep on hearing, drinking this nectar as much as I can. So he asked all these incredible questions. And in order to answer these questions, we begin to hear about the history of Brahma. Brahma, as we know, we've already heard the conversation between Brahma and Narad. And in these final chapters of the second canto, we hear all about Brahma.
Let me just get rid of this.
So many of you are already familiar with Brahma's birth. We know that Krishna is God at home. When he wants to create the material universes, then Krishna expands as Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu lies on the causal ocean. And from the body of Mahavishnu, many, many universes begin to emanate. So within each one of those universes, as many mustard seeds as there are within a bag, that many universes emanate from the body of Mahavishnu. And within every single one of those universes, the Lord again appears as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. The universe is known as a Brahmanda, like an egg shape. And half of that egg is covered with water, the Garbhodak ocean, the sweat of the Lord. And upon that ocean is Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, who enters within every universe. And then what happens from Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is that Brahma appears from the navel. From the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu sprouts a lotus, and upon that lotus, Brahma is born. So now Brahma is in this universe. He can't see anything. He can't go anywhere. He can't see anyone. He doesn't know who he is, what his purpose is, what he's meant to do. He goes down the stem, tries to discover, goes up the stem, can't. And then he hears the 16th and the 21st syllables of the alphabet. Tapa, tapa, tapa. He hears the word austerity, austerity, austerity. The Brahma realizes, I have to sit down and do tapa. I have to sit down and meditate. And through that meditation, all the realization will come. So Brahma begins his tapa, his meditation, which then continues on for 1,000 Divya Yugas. And when the Lord is pleased with Brahma, then the Lord gives Brahma a special darshan of himself, and he gives Brahma a darshan of the entire spiritual creation, where Brahma sees all the Vishnu incarnations and all the associates of the Lord in that spiritual kingdom. And as Brahma sees all of this and the Lord asks him, what benediction would you like? Then Brahma prays for empowerment. He says, Lord, you empower me to fulfill your task for me in this material world. You empower me to create. But along with empowerment, Brahma also says to the Lord, empower me, but also give me humility. Because the danger always is that when you give us empowerment, when you give us ability, that we will think, I am the doer. Karta ham iti manyate. That I'm the one making it happen. So Brahma said, please give me the humility also. In this way, Brahma was empowered. And the Lord at this time spoke the Chatu Shloki to Brahma. This is the 4 original verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, spoken to Brahma at the time of creation. So Brahma had to perform that austerity before he received the divine darshan. Brahma had to come out of his comfort zone. I want to share with you a story that once I was on my first marathon ever, book distribution marathon. I went to Southampton and it was cold. It was pouring down with rain. It was a windy morning. And frankly, I didn't want to be there. So we all woke up, all the book distributed devotees, and I looked out the window and it was grim. Anyway, somehow or other, I chanted my rounds, and then I thought, at least prasadam time, breakfast time, some solace, some respite from the misery. So we sat down for breakfast, and lo and behold, the devotee had just cooked boiled vegetables. I thought, oh my God, this was our only solace. Surviving on prasadam is my only inspiration. boiled vegetables. How will I make it through this day of book distribution? Cold, wet, windy, miserable people. I'm probably more miserable than them. The devotee put on a lecture. The lecture was given by someone called Ravindra Sarup Prabhu, very amazing Vaishnava. And the lecture was on the verse of the second canto, and it was specifically talking about Brahma. And this was the purport that we read that morning as I was feeling very, very sorry for myself in the austerity or the austere conditions I found myself in. We all sat down and heard this purport over the loudspeaker. In executing penance, one must be determined to return home back to Godhead and must decide to undergo all types of tribulations for that end. Even for material prosperity, name and fame, one has to undergo severe types of penance. Otherwise, no one can become an important figure in this material world. Why then are there severe types of penance for the perfection of devotional service? And then here's the killer line. An easy-going life, an attainment of perfection in transcendental realization cannot go together. The Lord is more clever than any living entity. Therefore, he wants to see how painstaking the devotee is in devotional service. So here, Srila Prabhupada explaining that Brahma had to go through that struggle. He had to execute the penance. He had to come out of his comfort zone. He had to take a risk. He had to put his comfort to one side. And the net result of all of that penance and austerity was that he received divine darshan. Similarly, in our life, if we actually want to find Krishna, if we actually want to come face to face with the spiritual reality, then we must be willing to undergo the difficulties of the path of bhakti. It's not that Krishna is a sadist. It's not that Krishna wants us to suffer. It's not that he makes it difficult. Tapa means austerity. It also means heat. In austerity, one generates a heat within their very existence that burns up all the material desires. And therefore, these difficulties that we go through, they ultimately help us to purify our consciousness. The penances, the austerities we accept help us to forge a closer connection with Krishna. And therefore, we should not hesitate to undergo difficulty in the service of Krishna, because it's that difficulty and penance and voluntary suffering that we accept for a higher cause that will ultimately usher us into the spiritual reality. So the four questions that Brahma asked Krishna when he had the darshan of Krishna are these four questions. And the four answers that Krishna gave to Brahma became the Chatushloki Bhagavatam that we read. Now, I've mistimed this session, and I'm already looking at the time, and I'm already over time. So it means that we can't go into this in detail, but please, in your own time, study these verses. They're very, very deep. They're very, very technical, but they're very, very condensed in their information that they contain. And the acharyas unpack each one of these words and bring out more and more meaning to help us understand how in these four verses, the entire conclusion of Vaishnava theology is contained. Sambandha means our relationship with the Lord. Abhidaya means the practice and implementation of that relationship. And the prayojan means the ultimate conclusion. This is all contained within these seed verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then what happens is that these 4 verses then form the foundation of the 10 topics of Bhagavatam, which we've discussed many times already. Atra sargo visargascha stanam poshanamutaya manvantaresha nukatha nirodha muktirashraya. These are the 10 topics which will be discussed in Bhagavatam. Remember, first canto was dealing with Adhikar. Second canto was dealing with sadhana, how to become absorbed in the Lord. And then the third canto primarily deals with sarga. There we hear the conversations of Devahuti and Kapila, Sankhya philosophy, the conversations between Vidura and Maitreya, in which so much understanding of elemental creation is coming out. In the fourth canto, we hear about Visharga. Brahma has many offspring. One of Brahma's offspring is Swayambhuva Manu and Satarup. They have 3 daughters and 2 sons. And from those 3 daughters and 2 sons, many other living entities begin to populate the creation. And therefore, Canto 4 is dealing with Visharga. Canto 5 is dealing with Sthanam, maintenance, because we hear all about the different planetary systems and how the Lord expertly arranges different realms within this cosmos in order to give the living entities the required experience to evolve their consciousness. Canto 6 deals with Poshanam, because there we're hearing about Ajamil, we're hearing about Vritrasura, all of these devotees who were protected and kept nourished by the Lord. In the 7th canto, it's all about Uti, or creative impetus. The creative impetus for this world is lust and greed, the desire of the living entity. Later on, Bhagavatam will explain. Shastriyame tuni bhavametam tayor mithoritaya grantimahur atho griha kshetra sutapta viter janasya moho yamaham maneti. When one has attraction to the opposite sex, when one has lust, greed, material desire, then what happens? Ato, griha, you have to have a home. Kshetra, you have to create a whole situation of maintenance around you. Sutta, you have children. Apta vitir, you have a treasury. Life just expands and expands and expands because of material desire. That's not to say that the connection between man and woman can't be done in a sacred way in order to engender spiritual advancement. But the point that's being made here is the creative impetus behind everything in life is lust, is greed. Therefore, one time someone came to Srila Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, here is my car, and here is my house, and here is my family, and here is my role and responsibility and position in the world. And Prabhupada looked at him and said, here is my sex life. Very heavy. I mean, we could not say such a thing. Prabhupada just said it. He said, here is my sex life. Because it's from that desire that everything else expands. So who do we hear about in the 7th canto who has such lust, such greed? We hear about Hiranyakashipu. And therefore 7th canto, Utti. 8th canto is all about Manvantaras. We hear about the 14 Manvantaras who make up a day of Brahma and the different activities that happen, the churning of the milk ocean, the interaction of Vamandev and Bali Maharaj, all these things. 9th canto, we hear about Ishanukatha, because we hear about Lord Ram. There's a mini Ramayan in the Bhagavatam, canto 9. We hear about Parashuram. And in canto 9, we hear all about the family lineage which leads up to Krishna being born in this material world. Canto 10 deals with Ashraya, because it's all about Krishna, the supreme shelter, his pastimes, his name, fame, form, qualities. Canto 10, we get Krishna's address, Krishna's telephone number, Krishna's mates, Krishna's daily schedule, Krishna's inner mind, everything we learn about. Canto 11 deals with Mukti, because in Canto 11, Krishna is about to depart the world. And before departing the world, he gives his final instructions to Uddhav. And therefore, the 11th canto is primarily the Uddhav Gita, explaining how one can live in this world, be liberated from material influence. Because essentially, the Lord was telling Uddhav to take sannyas. So all of his instructions are infused with knowledge of how to become liberated from materialistic influence, and therefore mukti. And the final topic, canto number 12, deals with nirodha or annihilation, how the universe is annihilated, how the body is annihilated, how the false ego of the living entity can be annihilated, and ultimately we hear about how Parikshit is annihilated, because in the 12th canto, the whole conversation ends, Sukadev leaves, Parikshit goes, rests in meditation, and the snake bird Takshak comes and takes away and annihilates his body. And in this way, the Bhagavatam is the total theology, the most advanced theological revelation in the world. It's not just a slogan, it's not just a PR line. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj went on national television and he said, I challenge anyone, if they can show me a theology which is more advanced than the Vedic revelation, then I will convert right here, right now. And why is the Vedic revelation the most advanced theology in the world? Number one, eternality. Because the instructions and the wisdom contained stands for all times, places, and circumstances. It's not relative wisdom to a particular time frame or place. Comprehensiveness, the Vedic revelation and the gamut of subjects that it covers within its books of theology is so comprehensive that it practically deals with everything you can imagine. Beauty, the charm, the poetic nature of how things are expressed, and the love and softening of the heart that it induces within the reader means that you'll never find something more beautiful than the Bhagavatam. And the auspiciousness, the Vedic revelation is the most advanced theology in the world because it actually creates auspiciousness in the world. I went to UCL. UCL was founded by someone called Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham's philosophy was known as existentialism. And the tagline of existentialism is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And when I told that to a devotee once, he said, nah, Krishna consciousness means the ultimate good for every single person. Because if people actually absorb the message of Bhagavatam, it will create auspiciousness in the world. Therefore, when Prabhupada came to America with his Bhagavatams, he also printed a bill, a leaflet, a flyer. And on the flyer was his picture, the Bhagavatams, and the tagline was Bhagavatam, India's message of peace and goodwill to the entire world. Because it's this beautiful Bhagavatam that if it's grasped, honest, thoughtful, and expert people, then it will create so much auspiciousness, not only in our life, not only in our family, not only in our community, but in the entire world. And therefore, we come to the conclusion of the second canto. That was a marathon. I hope it wasn't too fast. But essentially, the whole purpose of the second canto is that Sukadev wants to help cut by his sharpened words Parikshit's attachment to the material world. And therefore he begins by talking about how Parikshit can connect to the spiritual reality. Then he goes on to talk about how this universal creation is simply temporary. It's in a flux. It comes and goes. Krishna says, Bhutva Bhutva Praliyate, here today, gone tomorrow. Don't take the illusion too seriously. Universal creation is a temporary creation of the Lord, is here for a purpose, utilize it, and then get out. And finally, Sukadev explains to Parikshit the 4 seed verses of the Bhagavatam that encapsulate this entire philosophy, the 4 seed verses that eventually expand into 10 topics and form the basis of the Bhagavatam, the most advanced theology in creation. Hare Krishna. So I'm really sorry I went over time. My God, 17:17. Sankirtan Priya Prabhu, what is the protocol here? Shall we take a few questions? Are we allowed
Hare
to
Krishna.
cover?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Yes, we are over time, but of course we can take a few questions.
Take a few questions. I don't need to tell you. If you have other things to go, then please continue on. This will be recorded, so you can catch up later. So yeah, Sam Prabhu.
Hi,
Questions?
well, yeah. So someone is asking that Parikshit Maharaj is going to die in 7 days. So why did he need to hear about all these things that aren't necessarily directly related to bhakti?
So 2 points here. The first thing is that, as I mentioned, even hearing about the universal cosmos, even hearing about the temporary nature of the material world, that helps us to engender a detachment within us, which is not separate from developing our bhakti. Srila Prabhupada, when he gave his classes, so many of his classes were about basic topics of detachment, basic topics of understanding you're not the body, basic understanding of how miserable the material world is. Because unless and until we build on that foundation, how will we understand other things? So the first thing is we should not see that anything in the Bhagavatam is irrelevant. It's all relevant to developing bhakti. You just have to know how and why. And the other point to bear in mind, Krishna wanted to reveal Bhagavatam through Parikshit Maharaj, not so much for Parikshit, but for the generations to come. And therefore, all of these topics are there. Parikshit didn't need to hear it. His birth was amazing. His life was amazing. And his consciousness at the time of death was amazing. He was in love with Krishna all the way throughout. But because Parikshit was an instrument to reveal Bhagavatam for the benefit of all of us for generations to come, these topics are described. Unless we give up our attachment to the material world, we'll never be able to understand Krishna. And therefore, Prabhupada wasn't just talking about Krishna's sweet pastimes in Vrindavan. He was talking about the harsh realities on ground zero in the material world. You need to hear it.
Thank you, Guru. So another question is asking that in other universes, is there also the Bhagavatam? Is there also a process of bhakti and realization of Krishna?
Yes, so Bhagavatam is within every universe because Shri Krishna Parivartita, Krishna comes as Bhagavatam to bless the souls in every universe. Otherwise, what's the way out? Krishna is not going to create a universe and then create no exit route. That wouldn't be very kind. And according to every universe or every planetary system, the Bhagavatam is of different sizes. So the Bhagavatam in our universe is 18,000 verses long. In other universes, much more voluminous. There are Bhagavatams which have Krishna's pastimes in many, many more avatars that we may never have heard of. And so, yes, Bhagavatam is there. Krishna is there in that form because Bhagavatam is the eternal get out of jail card.
So there's another question asking that if we get Krishna from associating with his devotees, then why does the Lord not send more of his associates for us to associate with?
Krishna gives us what we need, but the problem is we don't take advantage of what we have, and therefore, why will Krishna send more? We're surrounded by so many devotees. We're surrounded by so many elevated personalities. How much advantage do we take? We don't take advantage. Like we have, sometimes people say, why doesn't Krishna give me more time in my life to practice Krishna consciousness? My first response to them is the time that you do have, are you using every moment of the time that you do have? Let's first look at that question. Because you know what? When you start utilizing everything that Krishna has given you, then he'll give you so much more. So why doesn't Krishna send more devotees down? Krishna can send unlimited devotees. But frankly, there's enough devotees to do the work if people would actually take advantage. Prabhupada was one person. How much he was able to do. A devotee is said he can deliver a universe. Devotees are powerful. So we must seek Vaishnava association and we must take advantage of Vaishnava association. And yes, be warned, Vaishnavas are dangerous people. Therefore, some people keep two chevrons apart from the Vaishnavas. Don't get too close. Don't let them get too much into your life. I'll follow the will of God, but to follow the words of the devotees, that's difficult. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. Yeah, I'm following Krishna's instructions in Gita, but I don't want to follow the will of a devotee. I don't want anyone to get into my life. But it's those sadhus drag you to Krishna. Prabhupada said, my spiritual master practically forcibly dragged me to success. Yes, we must take advantage. So yes, Krishna can send more. But even the Vaishnavas that are here, the world, we are not taking advantage. Maybe one more question, Sam, then we can finish for today.
Sure. It's coming a little off topic, but could you just describe that? How does a jiva get that initial feeling that he wants to be separate from Krishna when it's all there?
Hare Krishna. Yes, the eternal, perennial question. As I mentioned, Prabhupada has different stances on this. Sometimes it seems to intimate that no one falls from the spiritual world. Other times he seems to say that we did fall from the spiritual world. When we go on that line of thinking that the soul did leave from the spiritual world, the natural question is, but the spiritual world, why would you leave such an amazing place to come here to the material world? Like, why would you make such a terrible decision? Wouldn't you be fully satisfied in the spiritual world? Wouldn't you be so content that you don't need to even think about anything else? In answer to this, we can say that it's not that the spirit soul is discontent in the spiritual world, but it's just that they have curiosity. And as the English saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. So we have curiosity, like maybe a different situation. Maybe. What would that be like? And one thing leads to another thing. We leave and we get more and more entangled in the complexities of the material world. And before we know it, find ourselves in a cycle of 8.4 million species of life. So it's curiosity more than anything. And therefore, we rebelled against Krishna. Someone was saying, I'm a rebel. Krishna consciousness is difficult for me, I'm a rebel. Is it okay to be a rebel in Krishna consciousness? So the answer was coming that, be a rebel against the right things. Because you are a rebel, you left the spiritual world. Prabhupada was also a rebel, but what was he rebelling against? He was rebelling against free love. He was rebelling against artificial means to elevate one's consciousness. He was rebelling against eat, drink, be merry, enjoy, and commit violence to other living entities. He was rebelling against all of those things, and he was successful. So we rebelled from Krishna. That's why we came. And now we have to rebel against the material energy and look at the material world and say, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Now I'm done. I want to go back home, back to Godhead, back to Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. So I think we'll tie up there. Wish you all a very, very wonderful week. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your tolerance and the opportunity to say something. I hope this is useful. By all means, feel free to contact me and tell me of anywhere I can improve. It's not my medium. It's difficult, but we're trying something, and discussing Bhagavatam enlivens the heart. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj
Jai.
ki jai. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hey, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Sutapa Prabhu.
Krishna.
Thank
Amazing, amazing,
you so
amazing.
much. Amazing class.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Sutta Prabhu ki jai.
Bye.
Ki jai. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sutapa Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol! Haribol!
Hare Krishna.
Hari. Sabap. Jai.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.